All right, guys, with the NFL draft less than a week away, it is no better time to dive into our pre-draft rankings of every single fantasy relevant NFL position group. We're going to be going through quarterback rankings, tight end rankings, wide receiver rankings, and of course, running back rankings, ranking them 1 to 10, which prospects you need to keep an eye out for and check out the landing spots in the NFL draft. So as always, like, subscribe, comment on the video down below, and we'll get into our first draft rankings right after this. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football, and today we're going to be taking on basically an exercise in insanity, which is trying to draft the wide receiver prospects in the 2023 NFL draft class without having any landing spots or draft capital, agnostic of all that information, and rank them for fantasy. I know, insanity, but we're still going to do it just because there's some guys that I want to highlight, pre-draft. I don't want to have this stuff get influenced with the post-draft rankings. So obviously this data will be obsolete in about a week or so, and we'll come out with some post-draft rankings, but definitely just want to highlight top 10 guys, in my opinion, you should be looking forward to on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And without further ado, I will say the way I did these rankings and how I kind of pictured it in my mind to be able to do landing spot agnostic was basically pretend like every single one of these wide receivers went to the same landing spot. Every single wide receiver got drafted by the Minnesota Vikings to fill that wide receiver 2 hole right across the field from Justin Jefferson. Basically, the creme de la creme of the wide receiver draft positions in this draft. So let's just see how all their talent fits in such a great opportunity, giving them the best shot possible at an ecstatic NFL career. And with that being said, first and foremost, to absolutely no one's surprise, is going to be Mr. Jackson Smith-Njigba. He did have a little bit of a dip right after right before the combine. People were hyping up Quentin Johnston. Some other players are getting some hype, but everyone's come back to their senses. I know there's a little bit of injury concern, but now it's pretty chalky to make Jackson Smith-Njigba the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class. And there's so many reasons for that. The first and foremost is that he was on the team last year at OSU with both Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. And when both Garrett and Chris Olave, who were the 11th and 12th picks in their draft respectively, asked who was the best wide receiver in that wide receiver room, they both did not hesitate to say Jackson Smith-Njigba. So you're looking at 2 guys in Olave and Wilson who are already top 10 or top 12 dynasty wide receiver assets, and they're saying this guy's even better than them. Yeah, sign me up. I mean, even a super flex, if you want to take him at the 102 over the uncertainty of quarterbacks, I don't think that is crazy. This dude is an absolute stud. Take it from the players he played with, as well as CJ Stroud. Another big concern is that his slot usage, that he had all of his snaps are coming primarily from the slot. You can see on this PFF graphic right here, 34 out of 40 snaps he played in 2022 were out of the slot. Now, should that be a concern? I don't think so. First off, Ohio State, just the way they play, they try to maximize the utilization of their best wide receiver, and typically they stick whoever their dominant wide receiver is into that slot position. I don't think this is any indication that Jackson Smith-Njigba cannot play on the outside. Also, I mean, a couple years ago, we saw this guy at LSU, slot player. There are concerns about him translating to the NFL, and he plays for the Minnesota Vikings now. He's pretty good. Wouldn't worry about it too much. He's in a draft class that has major size concerns all around. He is kind of that prototypical wide receiver body. He's over 6 feet, measuring in at 6'1" and 200 pounds. He does run in the 4.5s, not an ideal speed for him, but I think it translates to the field very well. I think shorts to pads is not going to matter too much. So, and then the other reason why I love him is just the fact that his route running is Devontae Adams-esque. The way he runs his routes is so crisp, so clean. He cuts on a dime. He creates separation. I mean, everything you want in a wide receiver. He is the unquestioned number 1 at this position. And right immediately, it's going to get a little spicy here because at wide receiver 2, I'm going to be going with Jordan Addison over some other pretty consensus options. And I'll kind of divert a little bit here. One of the reasons why I actually came back and decided to do Dynasty content, I was kind of wavering on it, whether or not I was going to do some Dynasty rankings, dip my toes into content creation for it. But I was watching a Dynasty podcast, won't name them, and verbatim they said, if you don't think Zay Flowers is the number 2 wide receiver, you're effing stupid. You're an effing moron. Don't bother, trying to scout players ever again. I'm like, that's that's literally the antithesis of fantasy. We're supposed to be, an inclusive environment, an environment that fosters different opinions. That's why, you have some people high on others and other people higher on other players, and some people like running backs, some people like wide receivers. It's, a way for people to express and learn and, compare and contrast their opinions and then compete based on and seek validation in your opinions when championship comes around in weeks 15, 16, and 17. And I just think that was a very closed-minded view to have. So when I get into these rankings, I'm going to absolutely encourage criticism, encourage differing opinions, open a discussion down in the comments below. My opinions are my opinions, and I'm willing to be proved right or wrong. I hope I'm right, but this is just what I see, and I'm sharing my opinions and hopefully creates a meaningful and constructive discourse. I will say the funny other thing for that Dynasty podcast that will remain unnamed, they said, if you have issues with Zay Flowers because he's undersized, because he played in the ACC, and because he didn't have that much production at BC, you're just effing stupid. I'm like, those are all three very valid concerns, which I will address later because he's definitely not here. It's Jordan Addison, but it was just a very bizarre attitude to take towards fantasy. But let's get into Jordan Addison. I really like Jordan Addison. He is a dynamic prospect for me. His stock has been falling a lot since the combine, and I get it. He measured in pretty poorly. Under 6 feet, 173 pounds, which is pretty light for a wide receiver, and his 40 time was pretty abysmal for what people expected him to run at his size. And I don't want to say that the combine isn't important because there's obviously a correlation between the combine performance and the athleticism and how it reflects in the NFL. But with Jordan Addison, I'm willing to throw it out. And I know that's a very ignorant thing to say, but I trust what I've seen on tape. I trust what my eyes do during scouting, and I don't believe his 4.49 40 is indicative of his play speed. He's just so explosive and so athletic. He gets up to that top speed so quickly when you watch him play. Whether it's at Pitt or at USC, he was just dancing all over the field, outrunning defenders left, right, and center. And that stat was kind of backed up. They did a game metrics report, and it came out that Jordan Addison was on average 1 mile per hour faster on correlative routes run against Jackson Smith and Jigba. So his play speed is pretty fast. So I'm trusting what I see. I'm trusting that report and thinking that he's a little bit faster than what he put down at the combine. And then as far as his size concerns, 5'11", 173, yeah, it's super light. I get it. It's super small. But this is just the way that the NFL is trending. I mean, you look at this draft class, it's chock full of small wide receivers. Look at the NFL. Small wide receivers are now having more protection, and they're now more productive. There's a guy out of Alabama called Devonta Smith, won the Heisman. Don't know if you've heard of him. Had the same size concerns. Obviously not to the degree of Addison, but, still was thought of as undersized and too skinny to play the position, and he's been an absolute dominant force, finishing at wide receiver 10 this past year in half PPR. Some consider him a top 12 dynasty wide receiver, and I'm not saying Addison's going to be Smitty. I think he's going to be like a Smitty light kind of player, but I still think there's a ton of production and a ton of things that I like out of his game that make him, similar to Devonta Adams, and he can find production despite being that light. And also, one of the biggest factors, the biggest correlation, and it's been studied this offseason, between fantasy points and college production is college fantasy points. It's the biggest indicator of fantasy production in the NFL. That's what Addison has. He's been productive at both USC and Pitt. He was the Biletnikoff winner at Pitt. I mean, I love to have those awards attached to their names. It just gives me a lot of confidence in what they can do. I love seeing the production and the success, and Addison has it in spades. So he's my wide receiver 2. I think getting him anywhere at the end of the first round is a screaming value. Moving on to our wide receiver 3 is going to be Quentin Johnston. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to say that I think Quentin Johnston has the ceiling that's higher than Addison. He has the opportunity to be better than Jordan Addison. He has that size at 6'2", 210. He can go out and be that prototypical X wide receiver. He can light up NFL fields on the boundary, but he just has so many concerns that his flow is so much lower than Addison. I think Addison's a much safer player, but the concerns I have around Quentin Johnston is why I have him ranked here 3rd behind Jordan Addison. Not the biggest concern that really is factored in here with Johnston is the fact that his drop rate is just insanely high. It's 11%, which is double the average in college football. And if you drop balls in the NFL, you're going to get on the bench. And if you get on the bench, you don't have a chance to prove yourself. I mean, as long as you can stay productive, you'll have opportunities at the field. But if you fumble, if you drop balls, that's like a death sentence in the NFL. And that metric is terrifying, especially for a guy that's supposed to be touted as, a contested catcher like Quentin Johnston. If you're dropping 10 or over 10% of those balls, how can you label yourself a contested catch catcher? It just doesn't make sense to me, and that's a major concern. Also, I don't know if this will make sense, but I feel like Quentin Johnston is more of an athlete that plays wide receiver rather than a wide receiver that's extremely athletic. It seems like he was just an overall like very athletic person. They said, oh, you'll fit well at wide receiver. So there's just a ton of things that he has to polish up. Like, again, broad jump, insane. Agility, insane. Explosiveness, insane. Yak ability, power. He has all of that. But when it comes to translating those traits to playing wide receiver, there's still some things he has to clean up. His route running really isn't that polished. The body catches, the catch point, needs to clean that up quite a bit. And then also for a guy that's, a bigger wide receiver in the class, he has trouble creating separation. So those are three things that if he can get those cleared up, definitely see him. You could be the overall number one wide receiver in this class. It's just, those are a lot of things that genuinely do concern me and why I have him ranked here at 3 below Addison. Number 4, getting really spicy here. We're going all the way down. PFF was wrong for this. Number 4 is Jalen Hyatt. Yes, we're going with Jalen Hyatt here, and I really, really like him. Another Blitnikoff Award winner. What can I say? I love having that award attached to your name. It means you've had crazy production. College fantasy production translates to NFL fantasy production. You know the gist by now. And what did Jalen Hyatt do? Oh, he only put up over 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. That was a very, very dominant college football season. And I know this is not new information. The biggest concern around Jalen Hyatt is the scheme that he played in at Tennessee. It was not a very transferable scheme to the NFL. He was lining up in a triangle formation 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. I get that. But if this was a scheme, if you could scheme open players that easily, why isn't everyone else doing it? I mean, I get Georgia and Alabama, but why wouldn't Kentucky do it? Why wouldn't Ohio State do it? Why would all these mid-tier guys, obviously not Ohio State, but we're talking about a Missouri or a Memphis. I'm really struggling for teams right now, but why aren't if it's so easy to create that insane separation that Jalen Hyatt had, sometimes he's having 6-7 yards of separation. If that was so easy, why aren't other teams doing it? I have to attribute some of that speed and some of that separation to Jalen Hyatt's skill set. Also, he is just absolutely a track star. He's so fast, and I think that's going to be incredibly valuable at the NFL level. Again, with the way that the NFL is operating now, with more rushing quarterbacks, more scrambling quarterbacks, really stretching the field is a key dynamic to offenses. And Jalen Hyatt is the purest speed, deep threat in this class. Also, again, has pretty prototypical size. He's at 6 feet. He measures in a little bit bigger than some of these other wide receivers. So I could see him just on those traits alone, the speed and the size, being very highly coveted in this NFL draft class. There's just a lot of things to love. I think he will get a shot in the NFL. I think he will get drafted pretty highly. And I like what he brings to the game. And I am not going to discredit him from the system he was in at Tennessee. I think he is a much better player than what people are giving him credit for. And he is a screaming value. He's falling to the middle of the second round. Once you get past that first round, those first 10 players, I mean, it's all up in the air. Jalen Hyatt, I think if he goes to a good landing spot, you see him end up with the Chargers. I mean, take him at the beginning of the second round. I mean, he is a tremendous value there. So moving on to number 5, we're going to go down and we're going to check out Hyatt's teammate, and that's Cedric Tillman. I know it's getting really crazy right now, and I love Cedric Tillman. Another guy that, in a class of very small wide receivers, you can kind of guess what traits I value here. He's a bigger wide receiver, 6'3", 215 pounds. He's bigger than Quentin Johnston, and he actually plays bigger than Quentin Johnston. He high points the ball a little bit better. He has a better attack. He attacks the catch point a little bit better. He plays bigger than Quentin Johnston, but we didn't see it this year. So the people that are going to get mad at me for ranking him this high, it's because they probably only watched the 2022 tape. And I get it. The 2022 tape was abysmal. But go back, watch his 2021 tape. It was explosive. He finished with over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns and was one of the top wide receivers in college football last year. Unfortunately, this year, he suffered a pretty gruesome ankle injury. And I think he really tried to push it and come back a little bit too soon to help out his teammates. So that's when you saw him, he was way less explosive, way less athletic, was not creating the separation that he created back in 2021. And I think that can be attributed to the ankle injury. So when he gets drafted in the second round and people are wondering why he's breaking out next year, go back and watch the 2021 tape. I think he was a guy that just wanted to help his teammates and came back a little bit too early and was still quite hampered by that injury. And also, in an era of college football players that, are making business decisions, skipping bowl games, trying to save themselves for the draft, you really do value the character of a guy like Cedric Tillman, who said, screw it, I want to go out there, I want to play for my boys, I want to play for my team. I really appreciate what he brought to the game. And again, a screaming value. I'm picking him up. If he's falling to the end of the second round, I've seen some places where he goes in the beginning of the third, but I'm picking him up with those late second round picks, and I'm extremely happy. I'm taking him over some of those more concerning running backs, more like a Sean Tucker and a Zach Evans. So I really, really like Cedric Tillman. Let's move into our 6 and 7 players, which is going to be Zay Flowers and Josh Downs, respectively. I'm actually going to group them here together because I kind of have the same take about both of them. They're both 5'9". That's my take. Okay, guys, it's fine. I'm going to get a little bit more into it, but they have good tape. I get it. They're crafty. Yes, I know they're aggressive. They play with that dog in them. But I still can't get past like the 5'9" aspect of their height and how small they are when it comes to, the weight that they weighed in at the combine. If you go back to since 2000, there have only been 7 1,000-yard seasons put up by wide receivers 5'9" or shorter, and 6 of those seasons belong to Steve Smith Sr., 1 belongs to Hollywood Brown. I do not bet on outliers. I am not wasting a top or a first round draft pick, even if it's at the end of the first round, on an outlier. I just don't think that that's a great value. Historically, it just doesn't seem to pan out in the NFL. And also another big concern is that they just didn't play against, high-end talent. They're both in the ACC, and which tends to be, a conference that's faster and smaller than the SEC. So players like this can thrive. It's not a coincidence that both these players are in the ACC. Again, a conference that's renowned for its speed, but smaller players. Look at Kalijah Kancey, for example, if you want another example on the defensive side. So I think when they get into the NFL and they are going to have to go up against these bigger guys, bigger, stronger, faster guys, they're going to find it very, very troubling. My comp here is Rondale Moore, and I know that people are going to say it's a lazy comp because of, his size. They're just the same height, but frankly, I think it's a really good comp because Rondale Moore is a great wide receiver 3/2 fringe player. But he's severely limited by his height. Yes, he's been fantasy relevant. He's had some really good fantasy games. He's come out and put on a show, gotten people some wins in some weeks. But what I go back to is just he is severely limited by his height. And I'm going to tell you an example instead of just hypothetically talking about this. Last year, the Cardinals were playing the Saints. And the first drive of the game, Kyler was driving the ball down the field. Then he goes and throws a fader out to Rondale Moore in the background, or in the back of the end zone. Guys, this is comical. Looking at Rondale Moore looking up, trying to jump over the defender and catch it over his back shoulder, fading out of the end zone. It was doomed from the time it left Kyler's hand, and it made Rondale look foolish, frankly. And the DB looked like he was 6'7". It's just, there are severe size limitations, and that's why I'm not betting on outliers like Josh Downs or Zay Flowers, given the historical information. Hopefully you can take that and constructively counter oppose my argument. So number 8, obviously Zay was 6, Josh Downs was 8. Number 8, we're going to scroll down quite a bit more. See if we can find him here. Yes, Marvin Mims, a guy that I really like as well. If I wasn't such a coward, I would put him above Zay and Josh Downs, but I don't know. I don't want to put those two guys too far down my rankings, but in my heart, Marvin might be a little bit higher. He's just super underrated wide receiver, a guy that's just had tremendous production coming off a 1,000-yard receiver, and he plays in the SEC. Maybe he's just being ignored because he played an Oklahoma team that lost Caleb Williams that wasn't really good this year, but he's a guy that he has all the traits you want. He ran a 4.3 at the combine. He comes in, he has really soft hands. He really knows how to pluck the ball out of the air, and he just runs really crisp, clean routes. I can just say that when he plays the game of football, it does look effortless. This is a guy that I think could sneak in to the end of the second round. I feel pretty good about him coming into the NFL and finding an offense that if he can be, kind of a KJ Osborne type player, kind of that borderline wide receiver 3, flexes in and out of the slot on an as-needed basis. I think he's just a very good Swiss Army knife when it comes to the wide receiver position. And a guy that, target him in the beginning of the third round, end of the second round, but will heavily be impacted based on landing spots. But he slots in at number 8. And right now we have getting down to our last 2 players. Number 9 is Rashee Rice. And I'm going to take a second here and say, listen, historically, only about 4 or so receivers are relevant in every single draft class. And this being one of what's considered a worse draft class right now, even starting with, the 6th ranked guy you have in the class, you're just taking shots. Pick your flavor, pick the guy you like. Obviously, you're not going to see me pick any more undersized wide receivers. Tank Dell will not be on this list. Tyler Scott will not be on this list. I'm just taking shots on guys that I think fit that typical wide receiver prototype of the NFL. Obviously, Rashee Rice does do that. He kind of comes in around that 6'1" mark, pretty tall for a wide receiver, weighs in at 200 pounds, a weight benchmark that you want to see from your wide receivers. And I think where he could really be effective is he's not a burner, he's not a deep speed guy, but his explosivity is off the charts. He was in the 97th percentile in his 10-yard split in his 40. And I think when it comes to beating a guy off the line, jamming a safety or a slot corner off the line, and really working the middle of the field, coming in and doing those quick out routes, I think you could find a lot of value as a wide receiver 3, maybe maybe creeps into that wide receiver 2 if he can polish up his game a little bit more. Unfortunately, he did play at SMU. He played in the AAC. And when he's not in a Power 5 conference like that, you want to see them dominant. Rashee Rice did not dominate the way you see a guy play. So he would have to take a big leap to be fantasy relevant in the NFL. But again, I'm taking my shot on a guy that has that prototypical size and has shown flashes of brilliance. I'm not going to say he was consistent, but he's shown those flashes before. And listen, all these Oompa Loompas running around in this draft class, I'll take the 6'1" guy in Rashee. And we're going to finish off at 10. There's a lot of guys that we could put in here. Jaden Reed. A lot of people love A.T. Perry, Michael Wilson, Tank Dell. I don't, but I'm going to throw in Parker Washington. He's going to be my 10th guy. I mean, let's be honest here. Any guy that you're ranking 10 or below in your wide receiver draft class, it's like a 10% chance they even have a single relevant fantasy season at the wide receiver position. So you're just taking your shots on players that you seem to like. And I will absolutely admit that I'm helmet scouting a little bit here, but there's something I just love about the wide receivers that come out of State College, Pennsylvania. They have great wide receiver coaches there. They know how to pluck the ball out of the air. Jahan Dotson last year, I was super high on him because the way I was describing it is just the way he catches the ball is pretty. It looks like he's literally holding a baby bird in his hands. It's the most soft, most eloquent catch you'll ever see in the NFL. And his hands are just immaculate. So maybe I'm transferring that a little bit over to Parker Washington, but I also think he shares some of those same traits with Jahan Dotson, where he is a very eloquent catcher of the football, if that makes sense to you guys. And also, he came out at the combine. He said, listen, I model my game after Deebo Samuel. I view myself as a Deebo-esque type of athlete. And listen, at this round, I mean, you're picking up Parker Washington probably in the 4th round of your rookie drafts, maybe somewhere towards the end of the 3rd round. He's going to be super landing spot dependent. But listen, a wide receiver that's going to be used in a jet sweep every time now and again. He wants to run the ball. He wants to put his nose in the face of the defender and create contact. He is a very aggressive player. He definitely seeks out contact. He does not shy away. And I'm just going to bet on those traits, and hopefully he can come to be I'm trying to think, who is the wide receiver 3 on Washington this past year? Curtis Samuel. He could be kind of like a Curtis Samuel-esque player, fantasy relevance here and there, come up into a wide receiver 2 position when someone's injured. So I like the upside of Parker Washington. That's going to round out for the top 10. So that's the 10 guys that I wanted to highlight in my pre-draft rankings. Obviously, this information, as soon as we know landing spot, then draft capsule, will absolutely become obsolete. I promise you, no matter how high Tank Dell goes, he will not be in my top 10. I don't bet on outliers. So that's your first taste. Wide receiver was my favorite position group, so that's why I covered it first, but we'll be also checking in with the quarterbacks, the tight ends, and the running backs. So leading you up to draft week with all this information, and let's have a wonderful draft. See you tomorrow.